these truths to be self-evident.
That all men are created equal.
As a member of Congress, I get to have a lot of really interesting people in the office. Experts on what they're talking about.
This is the podcast
for insights into the issues.
China, bioterrorism, Medicare for all. In-depth discussions.
Breaking it down into simple terms. We hold
these truths.
With Dan Crenshaw.
The Eagle has landed.
Hey everybody, welcome back. With everything in the news lately on China and Russia, I thought, what is the best way to inform our listeners on these subjects? Well, let's find some ambassadors to China or to Russia, or at least former ambassadors, or we could find a guy who was ambassador to both Russia and China at different points in his life. And so we have Jon Huntsman with us. Jon, thank you so much, or let's say Governor Jon Huntsman, because not only were you ambassador to China and Russia throughout the last few years, but you were also governor of Utah.
Dan, it's a great pleasure to be with you. You know, I try to get my kids to call me Your Holiness, but that doesn't always work, so titles float around. They don't mean a heck of a lot, but, John will do. But yeah, I was governor of the great state of Utah, running again, and in a great election, and, with all the uncertainty ahead, bringing together so that the knowledge of the world and contacts and relationships, I see as a huge advantage in getting the state ahead and keeping it ahead as we go forward.
Well, it's a great.
So thank you for that.
It's a great state, and I don't know if I agree with this ranking, just being from Texas, but Utah was ranked when you were governor. It was ranked as the best managed state in America by Pew Center on the states. So that's pretty cool. I mean, did they get it right? I don't know. Yeah,
they did. And I used to rub that in. I used to rub that in with Rick Perry all the time, who's a great friend. And, we would always have battling competitions over job creation and best managed state. But suffice it to say, between Texas and Utah, you got probably the two best states in America.
It really is. I'm so proud of Texas right now as we reopen our economy. And oh my God, the sky is not falling. Could you imagine a world where people can socially distance but also live somewhat normal lives? I mean, could you imagine the people being allowed to do that and live with freedom?
It is true. I mean, we just want to be told what are the dangers, what are the hazards. Let the public health experts speak out and let us govern ourselves. That's liberty. That's what makes our country stand out above all others.
Yeah, it's and no other point in human history have we reacted this way. So I want to actually finish your resume real quick, because you were not just ambassador to China and Russia. You were also ambassador to Singapore in 1992 to 93. You were the ambassador to China 2009 to 2011, Russia 2017, 2019. And we're going to talk about that because, boy, those are two interesting years to be an ambassador to Russia. Wow. And you were at the Reagan White House as well in 1983 and a deputy U.S. trade representative from 2001 to 2003. So you've served under multiple administrations. You really know what you're doing. And not only that, but quite a bit of philanthropy, as we know from the Huntsman family, the Huntsman Cancer Foundation, as well as which has done amazing work. And you're married with 7 kids, one of which is Abby Huntsman, who I got to meet on The View when I was on The View, and she's left The View since then. And is her daily stress level much less now, I would imagine?
It is. Well, you know what, Dan? She's now helping with the campaign, so I'd say her stress level has gone from 100% to maybe down to 95%.
Yeah, but still less than The View.
She also said that when you appeared, that you were the favorite guest that they'd had on a very long time. She had no reason to pander at all. So kudos to you for figuring out the ladies.
Oh, that's good to hear. It's good to hear. It was a good show. I should go back. On. All right, let's get into it, because your level of experience is enormous. I got a lot of questions to ask you about China, which has recently threatened to sanction me because of my bill, which would allow the American people to effectively sue China through our courts, and it would effectively change the Foreign Sovereign Immunities Act in order to do so. Tom Cotton is pushing that in the Senate. I'm pushing it in the House, and the Chinese don't like it. Imagine that. So we're going to get to that, but because of all the news and this week with General Flynn, with everything that is now coming out about Obama administration officials really knowing about or knowing that there wasn't much to this investigation to begin with, but that they pushed it anyway. It's a very confusing mess. I don't know that you need to get into the details of that unless you'd like to, but I'm frankly confused by it. I know that people are confused by it, and it's really unpacking all this is complicated, but you were ambassador to Russia at this time. I guess you took over that role as President Trump took office. So, I mean, just in general terms, what was that like?
Well, it was, suffice it to say, Dan, the most difficult period in a bilateral relationship between the United States and Russia, probably going deep into the Cold War. I mean, you have to go a lot of decades back to find another period of greater tension, and by that I'm talking about the tit for tat between the United States and Russia. In the post 2016 period after the election, you'll remember that. We kicked out a bunch of GRU and SVR operatives in the United States. And of course, they responded by kicking a bunch out of Russia. And so try to manage an embassy where your staff is taken down 70%. So that was the environment. So just managing the operations, which include, a lot of sensitive national security work, the traditional trade and people-to-people stuff, consular and visa work, that kind of thing. And then came the Skripal poisoning in the UK, as you'll remember, and another round of expulsions. We kicked out another 60 or so intelligence operatives from the United States, and they took a whack at 60 more of our top professionals in the embassy. So that was the backdrop to what was, beyond that, a bilateral relationship completely in tatters. And all the while, we had issues like arms control, the future of very sensitive arms control agreements like New START. We had Syria that was ongoing, the civil war in Syria, where we were deeply involved, and so, of course, is Russia. We had collaboration on North Korea, Afghanistan, counterterrorism. So carrying on all of these regional and global issues with the Russians, because they have a seat in the UN Security Council. They are a player with a lot of these critical issues. You've got to carry on a dialogue. You've got to find common ground. That's what diplomats do, difficult as that might be. So the backdrop that you've described and that I sort of fleshed out just a little bit made the interaction practically impossible. Yeah. Because there was no trust. There generally has been very little trust between the United States and Russia, and it went down to about zero. So try to get a member of Congress to take an interest in U.S.-Russia when all of these investigations were ongoing, when it was in the daily news cycle, constantly, all these allegations being thrown out. I was sitting there in Moscow watching the headlines play out thinking, this has no connection to what I'm seeing on the ground. All of these charges and accusations toward the president, toward his staff during the campaign, toward his business activities in Russia. We were on the ground. We kept the files, and we pretty much had a sense through our information intelligence networks what was happening, and it was far different from what was being presented to the American people through headlines and news accounts. And then it all ended, Dan. And when was the last time you heard anything about it? When it ended, yeah. It just ended. Right. It was like 2 years of difficulty because we could not advance any of our key issues in the U.S.-Russia relationship, which even in the best of circumstances is probably the most difficult bilateral relationship in the world to manage.
So what was the truth that you were seeing, and how was that different from what was playing out in the media? So the truth regarding what? The Russian government's relationships with the Trump campaign?
Whether it was Carter Page or others, people who were apparently operatives of the Russian government, or who were under the control of the Russian government, the ties that Russia had within the campaign, right? On and on and on. I mean,
were the Russians themselves just taken aback? They're like, I mean, well, what did they say to this? Because it's an interesting problem set here. We know, and we have evidence that they certainly tried to interfere via their bot farms and social media posts and all of that. And so on the one hand, they're still denying that, but it also seems like there wasn't some conspiracy operation going on with the campaign either. And so, like, how did they react to this in private?
The Russians have a goal of sowing seeds of doubt, confusion, and division in the United States. They did it in 2016. We all know what they did. It came out through pretty much a unified intelligence community assessment. Mm-hmm. It's very rare that the intelligence community, in all of its many pieces, ever comes together around kind of a unified finding, and they did. In terms of what the Russians did in the 2016 election. So all you have to do is go back and read that, which I have done, both classified and unclassified versions. But you got to remember that they have been involved in our elections for a very, very long time, in some way, shape, or form. So the backdrop to all of that was, on the one hand, glee on the part of the Russians, because they were succeeding in sowing seeds of
way more than they ever thought possible. Way more.
Oh, listen. Their investment of a few $100,000 through bot farms and leaked emails through some of their cutouts, like, Guccifer 2.0 and DC leaks and stuff like that, and WikiLeaks. I don't know what their investment was, but probably a few $100,000. The return they got on that in terms of airtime and the division and the sort of cantankerous nature that they created within our political system was just sort of an off the charts return on investment.
Yeah.
So they're always gleeful about that, because one thing the Russians are really good at doing, they're really good at moving into certain markets with disinformation and propaganda campaigns, doing it on the cheap, because their tools are so much better than anyone else's, and they get huge returns on investment for what they do, and they're still doing it today. I mean, if you look at the coronavirus discussions, you go to the extreme ends of those discussions. Guaranteed, the Russians have cutouts and disinformation campaigns that are targeting a lot of the messaging that is going on there.
Yeah, they are very good at it. It's also, and it's difficult to engage in the same kind of tactics against them, because they're not an open society, and they don't allow that kind of division to spread at all. And so it's easy to attack an open society like ours, an open democracy with information operations, and especially when we're as divided as we are, and always looking to confirm our biases against our political opponents. And it's been sad to see how opportunistic that's become.
It's our greatest asset, Dan, and it's our greatest vulnerability. And both the Russians and the Chinese have taken complete advantage of our openness. Not that should change or ever will change, but we are vulnerable in that sense.
So have you been surprised by what's materialized over the last few weeks with General Flynn, with what is coming out that Obama administration officials knew? They all seem to be on record saying that they were unaware of any collusion, and yet in public they were saying something different. They were encouraging the FBI to keep going. These FISA warrants, the Steele dossier, that's a bit more old news, but it's all really coming together to suggest that there was political power used or government power used to go after political opponents.
It scares me to death, because this is what third world dictatorships do. And it's a complete infringement upon individual liberty, on our basic civil liberties, on intelligence gathering domestically. And you look at these people who were part of the unmasking exercise of General Flynn. I mean, I don't know how many, but dozens and dozens were part of that. If it happens to General Flynn, you say it's a good thing we're looking into this and bringing it to light, because we really need some safeguards in terms of how our intelligence capabilities are used internally against our own people.
Yeah, it's devastating to the institutions that we really need to trust. And it's pretty clear that there's a lot of actors here who are not trustworthy. And of course, I just remind everybody, these are the same kind of people who'd be coming back under a Biden administration. So that's my point.
Well,
there.
It's true. And listen, Dan, you mentioned the word trust. What is the one thing we have in this republic of ours that makes us unique in all the world? We still have trust in our public institutions and our leaders for the most part. We have difficult, robust, and sometimes really angry debates, but our institutions remain sound. The one thing the Russians and to some extent the Chinese target is campaigns that will diminish trust in our institutions and diminish trust toward one American and another, toward Americans and their leaders. They know that's the one thing we have that keeps our system together more than anything else, and that becomes the target. So you talk about trust; it's absolutely paramount in terms of the strength of our own system.
And as to the narrative of this Russia collusion, I always found it to be ridiculous. Mostly because I have experience in intelligence operations, and I know how I would try to set something up and how I would set up meetings and the way this would go. And I know how I wouldn't do it. And the narrative to me always seemed kind of fantastical. It seemed like a Hollywood narrative as opposed to how a real life intelligence operation would go, or especially a covert action, because effectively what the Russians are being accused of is covert action, within the United States. We, of course, do that, and there's plenty of books written on it, so I'm not giving away any secrets here. But it's a term that's used for, an intelligence operation to affect the outcome, either diplomatically, economically, or militarily of another country. And that was effectively the narrative going on. But then every fact that came out, right, like the Trump Tower meeting, all of these things, and recruiting Carter Page and all this, but then you start to pick apart the facts, and I'm like, this isn't what an operation looks like at all.
No, no,
and you have a lot of experience in this because as an ambassador, you're very close to the intelligence community. I don't know if people understand that, but the chief of station, the CIA chief of station, which operates in every embassy everywhere. Again, this isn't classified stuff. It's just well known.
Right.
It works very close with our ambassadors. It's a very important position to be in. So, you also know, like this never passed the sniff test.
Yep, that's right. Yeah, you said it exactly right. But let's remember that Russia has a different toolbox than we do in promoting their operations against us and throughout the world. It's a toolbox that we're not altogether comfortable with or familiar with. I think we're getting better at it. But a lot of these are tools of the 21st century, and we're going to have to figure it out. It's propaganda, cyber disinformation. In the case of the Russians, assassination, election meddling. You look at their history just over the last few years in Europe, and they're so good at what they do and what they manage in their toolbox that they leave everybody in the dust.
Yeah.
And we have to remember, too, that, the country is run by, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. Who himself, was an intelligence operative, and he runs the country like one large intelligence operation. And that's what he's comfortable with. That's how he sees our relationship. That's how he sees the world. And these are the tools that he's most comfortable with and uses regularly.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I want to hit on something here, which is why is Russia an adversary? It almost makes more sense to me why China would be more of an adversary than Russia. And it just seems to me that culturally speaking, there's some obvious differences between the West and sort of the Eastern Europe, Russia. But there's sort of an interesting, I guess, would you call it an analogy? Maybe not an analogy, but a little story put out there that inside of every Russian, there's an American trapped, kind of like a nesting doll, just waiting to get out and kind of live free and engage in the market economy and engage in democracy. Do you think that's true, or are our cultures really that different?
Our cultures have some similarities. They're very much a strong Christian nation. It's the Russian Orthodox Church. That's part of being Russian. Believing in Putinism as a prevailing orthodoxy is being Russian.
Yeah.
And trying to recoup the glory of their past is very much a driving a passion of the Russian people. But to understand Russia today, you really have to understand Putin, the man, and kind of what drives him, and the institutions that he has built to manage their state. And when I think of Putin, and this is instructive, you have to think of Peter the Great. You have to remember that the worst event of his life was a collapse of empire between 89 and then ultimately in 91. You have to remember that, his sweet spot in life was being recruited by the KGB out of Leningrad State University. He was raised in a poor family. He was an average student. He was probably bullied in the play yard. He studied law and was recruited, like a lot of people, at a Leningrad State University. 16 years as an intelligence officer, much of it in East Germany. He rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel. Most reporting would suggest that he wasn't, a standout intelligence officer, but that's his background. And then, strangely enough, when the whole world changed, which is the event he hated most, he resigned from the KGB in about 1991, 92 to go to work for the mayor of St. Petersburg in, of all things, economic development. And the guy he was working for, Mayor Sobchak, in St. Petersburg, was very much kind of let's open to the world, let's reform kind of leader. So his world changed. I mean, under his feet. And Boris Yeltsin came to power and basically moved Putin back to Moscow to work in the security and intelligence bureaucracies. He ran, the successor of the KGB, the FSB, for a while. He ran the Security Council for a year. And then he was appointed president out of nowhere. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody outside the intelligence circles knew who Vladimir Putin was. But Boris Yeltsin, like in the case of Chinese leadership changes, you have to find somebody who will protect you and your family and your net worth from those who are likely to come after you. So what is in Putin's head? It connects very much with history, and this is where we differ. So Putinism, I would argue, unlike the Cold War, which very much had a Marxism-Leninism center of gravity in terms of their orthodoxy, Putinism is the prevailing orthodoxy. It's nationalism, it's Slavic pride, it's the Russian Orthodox Church, it's Russia regaining the lost territories, which they will never do, but they want to control their periphery. They want to control their periphery that used to be the USSR. And they've got, 11 time zones that are part of this vast country. They have 150 million people. They are half the size economically that they were today versus the Soviet years. They're basically half the population, and they've got half the landmass. So they're a whole lot different than they were under the Soviet Union. So I just don't buy the idea that it's a Cold War all over again, because Putin is a much different figure. His aspirations are much different, and his objectives are fundamentally different than what we saw before.
So, it sounds like he sees himself as building more of an imperial Russia again. Not really. He doesn't really want to build back the USSR, or is it a mix of both? Who does he see himself as? Is he Ivan the Terrible? Is he Peter the Great? What? Or does he even? Is it more complicated than that?
We're simplifying things here, but what drives him? What drives him is returning stature to Russia. He grew up and was trained during a time where Russia was, in their mind, on an even playing field with the United States. Mm-hmm. They were the other half of the world. He wants to return stature to Russia. He wants to return to the greatness of empire. So, Peter the Great is the personality. If you want to try to get in Putin's head, Peter the Great is the leader that he would most connect with and see himself as.
So what he misses, what he misses from the USSR isn't so much the communist ideology, perhaps, but the greatness associated with it.
That's right. It's pride. It's about national pride. It's about standing in the world. And like the Chinese, when we get to the conversation there, it's very much about recouping the greatness of the past. It's national pride. And that's why so much of what is fueling politics in Russia right now, as is the case in China, is this heightened sense of nationalism.
Yeah, it's I went on a cruise throughout the Baltic, and we stopped in St. Petersburg for a day, and it's difficult for Americans to travel through Russia, and it was really interesting. One, our guide was very, very interesting. Now, she was well traveled in the United States. She was an older lady. She lived through the Soviet Union and post-Soviet Union, and she's just had the most interesting things to say about America. She truly believes that we're not free, and she had some really interesting examples that didn't make any sense at all. And it kind of went something like this. She's like, you guys can't get. What did she say? She says, you guys can't get the great literature like we can. And I'm like, yeah, we can. We can just buy it. We can just buy it on Amazon. Like, what are you talking about? And she's like, well, no. what did she say? She says it's so cheap because it's worthless. So you guys view it as worthless because you can download and you can. She's not wrong. Like you can download some of the older classics for free. And I'm like, well, I'm trying to figure out the logic there. Like, what's the problem with that? It almost seems like our system is working great. Like, we're not these things are plentiful, these wonderful classics. And she really believed that we were sort of held hostage by capitalism still. And that the communism really brought people together. And she had this kind of longing, nostalgia for it, even though her life was so clearly better off working in the job that she was working in. It was so interesting. The other really thing I noticed there was the Putinism is on full display on tourism markets and everywhere, and they have these. It's hilarious, really.
Yeah, totally.
And you can't tell if it's parody or not. Okay, so like in airports here, when you see a Trump bobblehead, with the MAGA hat on, like we kind of know it's in a kind of American parody. Like we're sort of having fun with it. I'm not so sure it's parody there. They have all that same stuff, but it's serious. And it's like Putin on a mug with his his tux on, but his bow tie is kind of like coming off, and he's got all these soldiers behind him. He's got like a halo around his head. It looks ridiculous. He's got cool sunglasses on. Like this is what they sell.
It's not a parody at all, Dan. It's the real deal. I mean, this is our savior. This is the person who's going to take us to the promised land. But it's interesting that you would hear that from your guide, because you see a very distinct division in Russia between those who came of age before 1991, very steeped in the doctrine and the propaganda of the old Soviet days, and they very much see it through the United States has a failed system capitalism, and then the post 91 generation, the younger people, who pretty much have bought into nationalism and Putinism, and that really informs their worldview. But listen, you can't live in Russia without having great respect for, the Russian people. They're beautiful. They're brilliant. Their history is long, and it's violent, and they wear it on their sleeves, and they will remind you that last century they lost 70 million people. And I tell that to folks here in the United States. How do you get your head around
World War II.
Right.
This is why I keep bringing up the cultural. Again, I can see much more cultural divides between the Chinese and the U.S. I see much less cultural divides between Russians and Americans. If you're all sitting in a room trying to get along, it would seem to me that they would be a lot easier. And so this gets kind of the next topic I want to bring up, which is what. And you hit on this before a little bit, which is as a diplomat, trying to work through our relationship and work through what we agree on, what we disagree on, and getting just moving forward on that. So what would that look like if the sort of the Russian hoax of investigation hadn't been taking place? I mean, what would have been our priorities, and what do you think we can work on with Russia, and what do you think we'll just continue to be at loggerheads over?
That's a really good question, Dan, because, this is where we're left. What is it that we should, as two responsible countries, be doing together to make the world a better and a more peaceful place? And this discussion will continue, even though the environment gets really bad at times and it makes work practically impossible. So, let's just start with, arms control. You've got two countries that basically have 90% of the world's nuclear weapons. So they have roughly the same number of nukes that we do, just under 5,000. And, they're able to deliver them with great accuracy and precision via submarines, land-based systems, and bombers. And they've spent a lot of money. And as you know, this is a very expensive endeavor when you upgrade and modernize your nuclear fleet. They've been through that, and their systems are, in some cases, pretty good, particularly the road mobile systems. Their submarines, they've got, a couple of them that are really good. Their bombers are basically 50s and 60s vintage for the most part. But we're left with two countries that basically have the majority of nuclear weapons. So there is a sense of responsibility that at least we have to build some safeguards against proliferation and against an accidental first strike, for example. So that is something that we always should be talking about, and we try, although it's very, very difficult. The INF treaty is basically taken off the table. That was probably the most successful arms control treaty ever negotiated back in the 1980s, 87 under Ronald Reagan. It took purgings out of Europe, and it took the SS-20s out of Eastern Europe, and that still holds today for the most part. But it's the big guys, it's the big nukes, the ICBMs, and others that really are the concern. So arms control becomes really important. The second category really are regional security issues, where the Russians, I'm convinced, are players in certain countries just to keep us off balance, and to do everything they can to undermine our standing. So Syria is a perfect example of that. They've developed a relationship with the Assad regime. They're trying to own the diplomatic process to free elections and bringing back refugees and putting out the civil war. And all the while, they're aiming everything right at us and trying to force us out, because they know that if they get us out of Syria, that's one more step in getting us out of the region, which is a region they want to dominate. Make no mistake about
Why
that.
is that? Why is that? Why do they want to dominate a bunch of sand and people fighting each other?
Because it's part of their near abroad.
Yeah.
If you look at the map, the Middle East ain't so far from Russia. Moreover, you've got a large Muslim population within Russia that they fear. The Chechens, for the most part, that they very much fear. And Chechens don't always take their directives from Moscow. They do from others in the Middle East. And they fought some really bloody battles against the Chechens not so long ago. Yeah. And they're constantly vigilant. And they treat the Chechens pretty much like the Chinese do the Uyghurs. And so they want a seat at the table in the Middle East. There's oil economics. There's there's oil politics that go on. There are security politics that are part of it. There is the idea that Putin wants to be a player on the world stage. Yeah. Because they have limited resources and limited reach. He can't be everywhere like the United States. So he has to pick and choose where he can actually be a player. So you team up with the Iranians, you use leverage in Syria, you cut some deals, under the table with the Saudis, and voila, you can become a player, particularly when the United States isn't present.
Yeah.
I would say, into that category again, I would throw North Korea, because the Russians have had an ongoing relationship with the North Koreans from day one. And the whole discussion about denuclearization, which of course was the goal of the United States, to my mind, that will never happen, because Kim Jong-un has no desire to denuclearize. That's his insurance policy against the world.
Yeah, and that's go ahead.
They're part of that discussion. They're part of Afghanistan. They stand up people, as you know, in Afghanistan, and pretty much to keep us off balance to the best of their ability, even though they've had a treacherous and bloody history in Afghanistan, as have we. So the whole broader basket of counterterrorism collaboration is one where we actually should be on the same page.
Yeah, we definitely should be. And in many ways, historically, we were with Russia. We've gotten some key, the Boston bombers, I think, we got that information. We didn't act on it like we should have, but we got that from Russia. It does seem that there's plenty of ways that we could cooperate. And again, before the Russian collusion narrative really took place, there was a history of cooperation on nuclear security, not just denuclearization of our own arsenals, which I want to talk about for a second, but nuclear security, meaning where can proliferation take place illegally? How can terrorists get their hands on this stuff? Because there's a lot of facilities all over the world that are not well guarded, and we probably have a mutual interest with Russia in making sure that those safeguards are in place. But there's not a whole lot of political momentum. Nobody really talks about it anymore, about denuclearizing. I think at a point in history, there was a lot of talk about the numbers and getting those numbers down. It's almost like we've reached a point where maybe they're down to a certain point where everybody's just comfortable with, or you don't want to get them down anymore, because then we won't feel like we're secure against the rest of the potential threats throughout the world. Like you mentioned, North Korea, the potential for Iran. Obviously, China has nuclear weapons as well. So do you see that as the case?
I would argue this, Dan. I would argue that we've kind of reached a point of strategic equilibrium as it relates to the balance of power with nuclear forces. you could go down as envisioned by the New START agreement, down 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever. You still have way more than you need to destroy the world many times over. But we have held the peace. Let's not forget that. We've held the peace given that security and strategic balance. Why it is important to Putin is because this is one element of power that he still has and controls. It's the one area of international policy where he can be seen on the front pages sitting at the negotiating table with the president of the United States. Yeah. That can't be done in the economic realm. It can't be done in the global political realm because they just don't have the reach anymore. So the one area that he really holds on to with a sense of pride that makes them relevant and gives them standing is their strategic nuclear posture.
Right.
And so they hold on to that. They call for arms control talks all the time. Nothing really happens, but the desire on the part of Putin and his folks is really to get PR mileage out of it, to show the world that they are still relevant.
So where do you stand on NATO? Because one thing you mentioned before was that Russia is very concerned with their periphery, and that usually means so the Soviet states like that used to be under USSR control and no longer are. It gave them a cushion, I guess, that made them feel secure. They don't have that anymore, and it's part of the reason they continue to lash out and invade Georgia or invade Crimea, and so. How does NATO play into this? I think I certainly agree with the strong wording that we've used with NATO, saying they need to pay their fair share. Do you think we should expand NATO, or do you think it's good where it's at? What's the right strategy there?
I think where we've got just under 30 members of NATO, and I think the goal really needs to be making sure that each member steps up and takes responsible ownership of their NATO participation, which is to say financial obligations that meet a certain percentage of their overall GDP, contributing forces and troops and material. The United States is, as you know, is the majority that makes up NATO, both financially and in terms of people and material. But let's remember how we got here with the Russians. We have differing values, we have differing views of history, and we have differing views of geography. The Russians still think that they own the old Soviet periphery, that is theirs, in large part because there are majority Russian populations in many of these countries where they have an ongoing little civil war brewing. So their biggest fear in life is that NATO will expand right to their doorstep. That's a nightmare scenario for them. So what happens when they see a country like Ukraine or Georgia or Moldova, in the case of Transnistria, begin discussions with respect to NATO membership? That's when the little green men show up on the border and they start a border conflict. Why? Because any country that has an unresolved border dispute cannot become a NATO member. So they know exactly what they're doing. They send in the little green men on the border, they start a war, and it makes it impossible for them to move toward NATO membership. But let's also remember that Putin's view of Russia's geography is the old Soviet footprint. And NATO basically is the one thing that stands in the way. His aspirations of making Russia great again can only happen with a weak Europe and a divided NATO. So he targets NATO constantly through disinformation campaigns, through little green men popping up here and there. They don't have any insignia on their uniform, but everybody knows where they're from. There's always plausible deniability. So his, number one desire, and I would say effort on the disinformation side, really is targeted at NATO, because he can't control his periphery with an active NATO. So because of that, I say NATO today may be more important than ever before, because the way we're exercising and doing collaboration among troops and sharing intelligence and having military exchanges right up to the Baltics and the Balkans is really important in making sure that the Russians don't have their way.
Yeah, I mean, it brings up the obvious question, which is there really an American interest in expanding NATO to their borders if it's going to create that amount of backlash? Because it seems to me that because they feel they have much more to lose, that they're willing to dominate us on the escalation ladder. I don't see us, and I think this has proven to be the case in Ukraine. We're only willing to do so much, and they know that. And so do we even have an interest in even having those talks with Ukraine? What is the American interest?
I think that's one of the calculations. So really our goal should be, if a country wants to seek membership in NATO, it should be up to the people of that country and the leadership of that country.
Yeah.
Right now, the Russians have made it impossible for Ukraine to move in that direction, and they will with any other country on the periphery. To my mind, you're looking at red lines. You cross those red lines, that's when you go kinetic, basically.
Yeah.
So would the American people support a war in support of the Ukrainian government? That's a big question mark. It's almost like, if we were to put troops into Taiwan, for example, and the Chinese were to invade, would the American people be supportive of going to war over Taiwan? After 20 years in the Middle East, I'm not sure the answer is yes.
Yeah.
So part of our national security calculations must be, what are those trigger points where we actually go kinetic, and how much can we do right up to that level? Which then, Dan, gets us into a whole discussion of spheres of influence, which is exactly the conversation that the Russians want to have with the United States. If to say, we have our sphere of influence. It's the old Soviet geography. You can control, by the way, we'll give you Central America, South America, the old Monroe Doctrine territory. Mm-hmm. We'll give you Venezuela with a promise that you just get your people away from our doorstep. You quit, your support of Ukraine and Georgia and the NATO exercises that are right on our periphery.
Do they really believe? Sorry, go ahead.
And let us control our sphere. That's their goal.
Do you think they honestly believe? Let's say, because I don't think there's an American, a government official, politician, anybody who actually wants to invade Russia. Like, let's just be honest. It's just not what we want at all. Do you think they believe that if we have an army, I mean, look, we basically do, say in Germany, do they actually fear us coming across their borders? Is that really what they think is going to happen?
Their propaganda within the country is constantly broadcasting a war with the United States, coming up to their border, incursions into their territory. But they talk about their territory as being Syria, as being the periphery. So Putin did a very wise thing. As NATO expanded, he created a bunch of tripwires. He knew exactly what he was doing. He knows how to light fires, create conflict, and invade borders. And so all of that territory is really seen as his, and the people of Russia drink from the spigot of propaganda. So anytime the United States is in the neighborhood, anytime we conduct NATO exercises, anytime we have, bomber task force flyovers, anywhere near the region, it's always the Americans are preparing an attack on we, the Russian people.
Right. And we see it totally differently. We see it as preparing for defense.
That's right. That's exactly right.
And we know when they do exercises, by the way, they practice bombing places like Stockholm, don't they? I mean, they do exercises that are literally offensive. We do them on the defensive posture, and yeah, it's like we're playing tennis against each other in two different tennis courts. It's just two totally different narratives. And I'm just trying to see the logic, because I don't think these people are illogical. Maybe it's about control of their own population. That probably is the answer.
The people are worn down in Russia. They're worn down because the economy has not trickled down to make their lives better. So if you were to do a poll right now on Putin, so he was reelected in 2018 with probably 80+% of the vote.
Yeah.
The polls today by the Levada Center and other respected, these aren't American polls. These are Russian polls that are done by respected organizations in Moscow. He's probably dropped 20 to 25%.
Really?
And a lot of it is because the economy is in complete free fall. They're not growing. They've done no reform. Capital is fleeing the marketplace. The young, smart innovators and entrepreneurs are leaving Russia. They're going to Europe, Israel, the United States. So they're losing their productive capacity, and it's leaving them basically with arms and oil. is about the extent of it. So now you've got, oil prices dropping. Their break-even point is probably $50 a barrel in order to cover all of their costs. They might have $500 billion in surplus that will carry them for a number of years, but they're in real dire straits economically. Their GDP is, you're a guy from Texas, you would recognize this. It's the same as the great state of Texas, about $1.5 trillion.
Yeah.
So they don't have a lot of throw weight when it comes to economics. And the people now suffering, 20 years under Putinism have about had enough. And I think that is a major concern for Putin. And the only thing he has to use against that sentiment is the Americans are a threat. They're invading. We're going to lose our country unless, we promote this constant sense of nationalism, which is what he's doing.
I wonder if I want to move on to China eventually, but the Russia conversation is so interesting. What if President Trump gets reelected in 2020? What should be our strategy here? Okay, because we can eventually say, hey, look, we've put that whole collusion narrative behind us. We still know you guys messed with our elections. You always do. We're really sick of it. Please stop. And all, but that's honestly, that's been a part of life with Russia for decades. I don't think a lot of people realize that in the 2016 election. It was the first time the public was aware of it. But for those of us who have been following national security issues for a long time, it's business as usual. This is what they do. And so what should our priorities be? And should we speak more to the Russian people? Like, look, this is what American free markets and American democracy looks like. We will never force it on you, but this is what it looks like in reality. It's kind of the same strategy I think we should use with Iran. It's communication. It's talking to the people and trying to thwart that narrative. But so besides that, or including that, what else should be our priorities under the administration?
Well, let's just take a couple of things going forward. One is, when you got a rattlesnake on your leg, the objective is to get it off as fast as you can. So what is the rattlesnake in the U.S.-Russia relationship? The toolbox of disinformation and malign activity, that's not likely to stop anytime soon under Putinism. And let's remember that constitutionally, Putin is termed out in 2024. And so far as I can tell, and every other analyst who looks at Russia, whether the intel community or State Department, nobody can figure out who his successor is. It's very close to the vest. And we're going to have to figure out who the possibilities are and begin to develop ties with that network at some point. But under Putinism, this malign toolbox isn't going to change. So I would say step number one is we need to build better resilience and capacity around cyber, around hitting back. So when we're hit with disinformation campaigns, we're able to hit back with greater force. The reason that he does it is because he gets nothing in return for the most part. The reason the Chinese steal our intellectual property is because there's no price to be paid.
Right.
So we've got to create and strengthen our own toolbox, number one. Number two is I really do think we have a responsibility on the nuclear weapons side to have a meaningful conversation with respect to where New START goes. So New START basically disappears in 2021. It can be extended another 4 or 5 years, and I think it should be. And we should have discussions, not necessarily on the elimination of, classes of weapons, but we should talk about nuclear safety and proliferation. I think those are the issues that matter most right now. And third really is trying to get a better read on where leadership goes in the post-Putin period, because there's going to be a complete drop-off after Putin. There's no one close to being in his league. He's completely bought off and controls everybody because he's made himself chairman of the appropriations committee with the oligarchs. He gives them ownership in state-owned corporations. He'll sell them assets at pennies on the dollar, and he's made a whole bunch of billionaires around him. And they all owe him a great deal, but there's no one else who can sit in that seat without being knocked off after a couple of days to run the country. So it's a very real question about post-Putin, and the concern becomes if you have a leader who can't carry on or can't keep 150 million people and all those nuclear weapons in check, I'd hate to see a Russia in fumble formation and one that completely collapses and the danger that would present to the world. So that becomes a real national security threat based on the potential for instability.
Yeah, and I wonder, I think politicians on our side might be too binary in their thinking, where it's hard on Russia, to what end though? Because you could be hard on Russia. We don't want to see a collapse of Russia. That would be very detrimental for many of the reasons you just explained. And you saw it after the USSR, arms being sold to the entire world, and who knows where they go. And you could see that same issue occurring again if there was an actual collapse. I don't know if we're close to that the way we were with the USSR, but you've indicated some pretty serious factors of their economy collapsing, people very unhappy, and it's not something that would be in our benefit to watch the entire thing collapse, I don't think. Let's move on. But you know what, actually, for everybody listening, you're going to have to tune into the next episode to get the China discussion. So we're going to cut those into 2 episodes. And so I'll give you a fake goodbye right now, because we're going to end this episode, but we're going to continue talking. I'm just getting everybody the behind the scenes on what actually is going on here. So, Jon, thank you so much for